All right, good day, everybody. Welcome to another Faith-Seeking Understanding. This episode, the program Calmly Considered. I'm Allan. I am your host. I am a retired professor, Bible moth, theologian in exile, and seeming more in exile every day, and a peddler of hope. I'm the self-appointed Anselm of Canterbury Chair of Podcast Theology and Culture here at Faith-Seeking Understanding University, a totally made-up university, but we are all invited to ponder profound things free of charge. And my conversation partner every month is Michael. Can I have a Super Bowl ring to Cruz?
Woo!
He's
Yes.
also the Grand Poobah Chair of Theology and Economics and Public Theology here at FSUU. Well, Michael, you were a pretty happy guy Sunday night.
Yep, that was pretty exciting. It was
That
cool.
run at the end that Patrick Mahomes made on that Gibby ankle was really impressive, I gotta say.
Yeah, it was lots of determination, lots of grit. I think they said afterwards he realized he couldn't cut to the right or left, but if he could run straight ahead, that he could do that. I've since seen a replay of the play that's kind of high up and from behind.
Yeah.
And they show Creed Humphrey, who's the center, and if you look at him, he's got his left hand down on the ball. He's looking to his left and to his right to the line beside him. He puts his right arm behind him and flashes Mahomes 5 fingers, meaning we got all 5 covered, which is a signal for you can run if you want to, because we got them all. He's looking at the defensive lineup, and he says we can do it. So sure enough, Mahomes steps back, gives a couple chances for the lineman to get position, to get her in position just right, and then boom, he takes off right by Humphrey. It's pretty cool to watch. Yeah,
it was a good game. It was a good Super Bowl. Philadelphia played well, and
boy, did they ever! Hurts was just amazing. Some of the passes that they caught, that the Eagles caught, 4 or 5 of them. I was just like, why? How do you do that? It was
just like watching a good game. It was a good game.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So anyway, well, we've got to move on to other things. Yep. Social Security and Medicare will be our focus. We're going to do Social Security. I thought we should do it and not only kind of go through the realities of it and the future of these important programs in our country, but also talk a little bit about the issue of social contract and societies and what we owe each other. I think I've always said, again, I'll say it again, I say it because I'm in a minority on this among Christians, and that is seeking the common good is not the same thing as doing kingdom work. Most Christians think any good work is kingdom work. I disagree. Having said that, I do think Christians should seek the common good with our neighbors, regardless of their faith convictions or the lack thereof. And so we want to talk about a little bit about that too. So let's talk Social Security. So President Biden had his State of the Union address. I mean, I got to say this, Michael, I don't watch States of the Union anymore. I watched them years ago, regardless of who was president, whether I voted for that person or not. But, I don't know. I mean, when you get older, I guess you just get like, okay, president, rah, 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 and his side, rah, 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 and the other side doesn't stand. And of course, there were some antics, by a handful of persons. I'm tempted to be snarky here, but I'm not going to do it. But I just don't watch it because I just don't think there's much to it anymore. However, having said that, when the president speaks, it matters. And so President Biden has spoken on Social Security, and we've had couple of Republican proposals and things like that. So before we kind of get into those specifics, let's talk about the overview, because there's always worry about Social Security and, of course, by extension, Medicare. Always concern about the solvency of Social Security, and will it be there for my children, for example?
Right.
So, Michael, give us a little overview of that and projections and how they do projections, and what are some of the things that happen or can happen to continue the life of this important retirement fund.
Right. Well, I think the first thing to realize is that every year they do an analysis, the government does an analysis of the sustainability of each of these programs, Social Security, the various Medicare box sort of things that they do to raise the money and spend it on Medicare, that type of thing. And what they're looking at is, assuming all things stay the same and where they are in the given year they're doing the analysis, and you project that forward, then they can say in X many years, then the program either flourishes or it becomes insolvent. It can no longer cover the costs that it has. I can remember in high school in the 1970s hearing how Social Security wasn't going to be there in 10 years. We wouldn't have Social Security. And that has been a recurring thing through my entire life, going back over 50 years, is that Social Security is on the brink of bankruptcy by somebody. I mean, somebody's always making that case. What all it's saying is that if things continue the way they are, then you have insolvency. Demographics change, economies change, adjustments have to be made. I think it was 1983 that they made a big adjustment. 65 has been the retirement age for those that were older. For most of us baby boomers, I think the average is going to be around 66. And for those coming after the baby boomers, the final retirement age, which you're fully vested, is 67. I think mine's 66 in a couple of months or something like that. And what that did by extending that distance out for when you're fully receive the money, it stretches the money further. So the question then becomes, going forward, the issue is not so much that the population is aging, it's that we, in terms of having more old people, the issue is that we're not having young people at a fast enough rate. And so what you end up is having what they call the dependency ratio, the number of people that are under 15, the people that are over 65 grouped together as one group, dependents, and then those that are 15 to 65 years old that are working. And the ratio, you want to have enough workers to be able to support those people that are independent in dependent situations. And that ratio is now becoming more lopsided. So I think I'm trying to remember what the year was. I want to say it was 2030 something. I can't remember the exact year.
2034, I think.
There you go. That's it. 2034. Yeah. They're projecting now that that's when Social Security would become insolvent. So there are several different things that can happen. Right now, we have a cap on Social Security payments. You only pay it, I think, on the first $138,000, something like that, of income that you get. That actually increases this year, is my understanding from past legislation. It will increase to $160,000. So that there is a cap there on what portion of your salary you pay Social Security tax on. If you were to simply do away with a cap and you just had people pay Social Security on all income that they get, the estimates are that would do away with upwards of 2/3 of the shortfall that you would have in another 10 years. So you would have that would cure the problem itself. The other thing is to move the age out a little bit in terms of when you get fully funded for your Social Security. So maybe it becomes 67 or 66 and a half or 67. Well, I guess actually it's going to be 67 now. So be 67 and a half, maybe moving on up closer to 68. Some combination of that would work. The other issue is simply raising the amount that is taken for Social Security from our paychecks to slightly increase that to balance it. So all three of those things are options. Some mix of those is what's likely to occur. And that's what we've been doing for generations. The idea is that this is a long-term investment. And just as with a person's personal investments, based on what their goals are and how much money they're getting, you keep coming back, you keep revisiting it every so often, and you tweak it and adjust it to make it balance for what you're going to have in the future. And that's all that's happening here. There's no great crisis. There's no great, it's all about to collapse. And the same is essentially true with Medicare. Medicare is a little bit different. but it's the same sort of thing. We've got an aging population. As we get past that work dependency ratio being a little out of balance, it will come back into a little more balance later in the century. So it will balance out some, but in the short term, we'll have to do some things like either find ways to cut costs in healthcare or possibly do modest increase to the Medicare amount that's withheld. I think it's 1.4%, I think, of paychecks that are held for Medicare. And I think I heard that if you raised it to 1.8%, that would cover whatever shortfalls that they think are likely to occur anytime in the 21st century. So, and in polling, it shows that vast majority of Americans would prefer to have small increases in their taxes as opposed to losing benefits when they are older and need Social Security and need Medicare in their older age. So yeah, it'll be some combination of those, but neither of the programs are on the verge of collapse or, there's no crisis. Yeah.
Michael, you would never win election to public office. You realize that. You're too calm and reasonable because well, I should say good politicians. Politicians that get elected and reelected are good at manufacturing a crisis, right? It's got to be the hunter at the door. And if you don't reelect me, they will, right? So, Michael, just, anyway. So I just want to let you know, in case you had any thoughts about future in politics, you probably should just forget it.
Well, somebody said to me once, jokingly said, "You should run for president." And I said, "Why do you hate me so much?"
Yeah, I know. Somebody said to me in another church years ago that I pastored, said, you really ought to think about running for town council. And I said, I get enough politics in the church. Why in the world would I step into, right? Yeah. All right. Well, so let me ask you a couple questions here in reference to some of the stuff that you've said. So we've got some fixes. There are fixes in the works, and it will happen. The article that we read on this basically said no politician on their watch is going to let Social Security dry up.
Absolutely.
Right? If you want to make sure you're out of office, just do that.
Right.
So let's talk about some of the fixes. I have heard people say, usually people whose politics tend to be more left, let's just get rid of this cap on earnings. And so, if you're making $1 billion a year, you should pay 15%, assuming you're self-employed. If you're a billionaire, you should pay 15% on that. First of all, second, you're not going to miss it. I mean, you're not going to miss 15% of $1 billion, but that's a pretty good chunk of change for the trust fund. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a question of how do you frame what these programs are? The idea that the Social Security is, at least in concept, it's supposed to be you paying in from your wages in order to receive your retirement income when you retire. It's not a program in which we just collect a big pot of money and then figure out how to distribute it to people that are older and need money. So it's a little bit different category. And so if you're just talking about doing an increase in taxes on wealthy people in order to fund Social Security or Medicare, you're changing the nature of what those programs are set up to do. That's a different question about, I'm not saying that that's right or wrong or that it's good or bad. I'm just saying that now you're into a situation where we're redefining how we're going to do the program. So do we want to do it that way? So I think the question is are people paying in enough in order to cover what benefit that they are going to receive? That makes sense?
That makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense. It's a way of saying also that all of us, and I will be receiving Social Security in a year.
Right.
It's a way of saying we've all got some skin in the game here. And so this is important. I remember someone saying to me years ago, a friend of mine who sadly passed away a few years ago, but she was American living in Britain. And we used to talk about stuff like taxes and healthcare. And, I believe it's true, Michael, that approximately the lowest 50% of earners in the country really don't pay any taxes. Something.
Federal income tax,
so that the tax burden is certainly the rich do pay more, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Even though I know people say they don't, they do pay more. and then the
Right.
middle class pays. And she said to me one time, she said, in England, and I don't know the taxes over there, so I was just taking her word for it. She said, and she was talking, because of course she did think the rich should pay more as well. She said, we pay higher taxes in England. But she said, even the poor pay something. Even if it's just a minuscule amount, they pay something because it's a way of saying to them, this matters to you too. The country matters to you too. And what the country does matters to you too. So you may pay a penny on the dollar, but you're going to pay.
Right.
Whereas we have basically fixed the tax system so that even those who are, in the 50% less really don't pay anything. I mean, I thought that was just an interesting thought. It's by the way, it's very capitalist, very, very free market kind of thing in a way.
There's a communitarian aspect to it as well too. The idea that everybody's part.
Well, this is true. This is true.
Yeah.
This is
so
true.
yeah.
So, but it was just an interesting thought, and I just throw that at you from what you said about Social Security. That in some way we all pay into this because this is for all of us, but I'm paying into it because it's for me too.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I think that's the idea that it's not welfare in the sense that we've talked about welfare in the past, where we raise money and then help those who are somehow have not been able to care for themselves, and so now we're giving them benefits to help them, but because to help them meet the shortfall that they weren't able to do for themselves. Whereas Social Security is framed as this idea that you're paying in and it's to be paid back to you. It's not welfare in that sense. And I think that's, do you want to lose that concept if you're going to talk about raising money from billionaires in order to pay for Social Security? That's interesting. But and mind you, I'm not advocating not taxing billionaires. That's not my point. There may be good reason to tax billionaires more, but funding Social Security and Medicare may not be the direction for that increase to go to. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let's talk a little bit about raising the retirement age, because of course that's been done already. When Social Security first started in I want to say the 40s. Is it the 40s basically?
I think the initial legislation was passed in the 30s, and then it had
in the 30s. Okay.
Mid 30s, I think. Yeah.
Full retirement age was 65. The average worker lived another 5, 6, 7 years. Right. In general. And now, of course, the median age of death has risen. I tell people, just my own little anecdotal experience, that when I started in the ministry in 1984, it was rare to have parishioners in their 90s. Yeah. And when I retired, that is no longer the case.
Yeah, right.
It's no longer the case. You got people in their 90s and people in their 80s, late 80s. Yeah. And so it does make sense. So now my father-in-law retired. He was able to retire at 57 or 58. He was able to retire early. And he's still living. He's 93. He's had a whole career of retirement. Right. I kind of hope to have that too, but we'll see. It does make sense, doesn't it, to raise the retirement age is a good way to help fund this for the future, because we're just living longer and we're getting paid longer. Right.
Well, part of it is that people are living longer, so they live longer after 65. I think another piece of that fits into that as well is that back 60, 70 years ago, you had basically 2 workers for every dependent that there was in society. And by mid-century, if we're not already there, we're getting close to it, it's going to be down to 1 worker for every dependent in society. So not only are people living longer, but you're also having fewer people as a proportion of the population to help support those people that are dependent. And I would add, I think that there's some other things that are, we talk about people getting older and 65, but I think it's also true that a number of people are working longer after they're 65, either out of necessity, but for many, just out of that's what they want to do. They want to keep working. I know people that are in their early 70s that are continuing to work without needing to. It's not a financial challenge. It's just that that's what they want to do. So that begins to shift numbers as well. I think increasing the age obviously is one calculation from a mathematical standpoint that would help. One challenge that I have heard, though, is that if you continue to raise the age of what do I want to say, the point at which you can take your fully vested Social Security amount. Right now, most people who are poor, the poorer the person is, the more likely they are to take their Social Security at 62. And so that means that when it was, I think the retirement age is 66. If you take your money at 62, that's about a 25% loss of money that you would have gotten if you'd waited 4 more years and taken that. It's going to go up to 67, is almost there. When it is 67 and you take that at 62, then it's going to be a 30% loss in overall benefits. If you start pushing that up to 68, you're talking well into 30%, 30, 35% range of money. So in some ways it penalizes the poor more. And you say, well, raise the 62. Well, yeah, that would financially make sense, but that's one more year that people who don't have money go without being able to access their Social Security. So there is that downside, that it ends up becoming people that are poor end up getting less of it, and those who can afford to keep working and wait till they're however old, 66 or 67, can take their full benefit. So that's one downside to raising the age.
Yeah, it's real interesting for me, Michael, because I retired at 60.
Right.
And my pension is a decent pension. So
right.
But I'm going to take. I turned 62 in a year. I'm going to take mine.
Right.
62, just because I keep thinking to myself, what am I waiting for?
Right.
Right. So everybody, you get these arguments from a financial standpoint, wait till full retirement age. And I'm like, hey man, I want it now while I can travel and stuff I want to do, because maybe if I make it to my late 70s, I'm not going to be doing that stuff. And so I'm not going to need the money.
Right.
So it isn't just a raw dollars kind of a thing. But it's also the quality of life and the dollars that you have. That does present a problem, though, if you're health impaired, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. If you've got disabilities, health impaired, you've got issues that are preventing you from being productive in the workforce, and you need to take money earlier. And you're exactly right. There are people that are quite wealthy that take it when they're 62. It's not a one for one correlation up and down the economic scale, but the tendency is that the poorer people are, the earlier they tend to take their excuse me here a moment, getting a phone call interference on that for just a minute on my iPad.
You're just in demand, Michael.
I'm in demand. It's my next video call here. I got to get on to no. I forgot where I was saying.
You were talking about the poor and not working and all that.
Right. Yeah. So if you don't have that, the incentive is going to be to take it at 62, but the incentive will be stronger to take it at 62 than if you have more money, but it's not a one-to-one correlation. Anyway, I just say that that's one piece of it. It seems to me that this is personal preference. I could debate this and be persuaded different directions, but I think where I would sit right now, it seems to me that the best ways to possibly raise it is to raise the cap or do away with the cap in terms of Social Security, and or simply increase modestly the amount that we pay into Social Security in order to fund it. So those seem to me to be the ones that I would go with. The age thing would work as well. And all of them have their pluses and minuses in terms of the
yeah, they do. They all have, because I was thinking, as you were saying about raising the cap a little bit, as someone who throughout his vocation was self-employed for Social Security purposes.
Right.
That's a lot of money every month. Because if you're self-employed, you have to pay your own.
Yeah, you do.
Tax.
And it ain't cheap.
But I mean, I do, again, it's what we go back to, and it's what you've said to me time and time again. Economics is always a trade-off.
Right.
And you do something over here that helps, well, that's also going to have a downside somewhere.
Right.
And you just can't get around that. That's why I always like the politicians, because everything, if you elect me, everything will be rosy and wonderful.
Yeah. Right.
And
Well, let's being here from Kansas City area, Independence down the road, Harry Truman, one of my favorite quotes was him. He said he always wished he'd had a one-armed economist, because he said every time he'd asked him something, they would tell him it would work. And he says, but on the other hand,
yeah. But on the other hand, here's the problem.
To give you the downside of this as well.
Yeah,
too.
my brother worked in a business for a while that trained in new software, and their business boomed when the economy was bad because everybody was coming back to get retrained. Right.
Yeah.
So when the economy was bad, they were making money hand over fist, and then when the economy picks up, all of a sudden they're having trouble finding people to take their training. So it's just one of those things. So let's talk a little bit about move into the issue of social contract and what we owe each other. I mean, one of the things that, and I said it to you before we went on this thing, is that, whether we like it or not, we human beings are born into communities. And by virtue of being born into communities, we owe the community. Because if the community is going to flourish, if the community, and that then includes us too, who are a part of the community,
right?
There's just things we have to owe each other. So when someone says, I love the extreme libertarians, taxation is theft. Well, right. I mean, we're all born into this contract,
right?
Whether we signed on the dotted line or not. So it seems to me now how a society arranges that and how we determine what we owe each other is always up for discussion. The best way to go about that is always up for conversation. But it seems to me that there's something about Social Security and Medicare, and whether it can be done better or not, that's a good question, or a little differently, that's a good question. But the fact of the matter is, part of the reason these things are here, I think, is because we should have a sense of responsibility toward one another.
Right.
And of course, I would say that even the Bible tells us that. And that even, you get admonitions in the New Testament to, do good to all, and et cetera, honor the king. Doesn't mean you have to obey the king, but you got to honor the king. It seems to be implicit there that we do have this obligation to one another. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think there obviously is an obligation, I think, that people have to each other. I think where the debate often gets into the politics, where you're talking about libertarians versus progressives and everybody else in between, what role does the government play in helping to meet that obligation? I think that a lot of the libertarian folks would argue that, of course, we're supposed to care for the vulnerable and the people who are dependent, but we should be doing that through private associations and through non-governmental operations, where there's also a sense of community accountability and sort of a community connection in terms of the people that are being helped, as opposed to abstract, inefficiently run, centralized government entities trying to distribute money. And I'm trying to cast it in that their way of framing things. And I think that on the other side, there's the issue that is a worthy ambition, and it's something that we should always encourage, is people looking out for each other. But there's a lot of human frailty and a lot of inefficiency and inequality that happens when it is just left to people to operate on what should be their moral obligations, and just leaving it there because people frequently don't operate. And so having a governmental approach to this that give some basic care for medical care and for income is a way of having it a little more objective and a little less dependent on the whims and the quixotic decisions that people make in various communities around the country. And so that's a debate. And I don't have a specific answer. I think there are issues to be considered in any program that weighs those kind of questions when we're talking about it. I am a little skeptical of some of the progressive ideas that happen from time to time, and that there's just seems to be this sense that government can fix anything. That if we just centralize it, give enough money to it, then it can all be solved. And I think that's inappropriate. I think the extreme libertarian point of view that there is no role for government is also not a helpful way of looking at things either. And
I think I would make the case that human history has demonstrated it's not an either or, it's a both and kind of thing. And,
right.
I was interested when you talk about, first of all, by the way, what your comments at first about accountability is a great case for federalism, because because politicians on the local level are always more accountable by necessity, by just the way, just by being so close. They're accountable in ways that politicians on Capitol Hill just are not.
Right.
And so it's one of degree, but I always, again, this is a generalization. So and generalizations are good, but they're also generalizations.
Right.
Is that my frustration with a lot of progressives on the left is, you're right, they do seem to think government is almost good at everything.
Right.
And fix everything. Whereas more conservatives on the right think that government is always incompetent and should not have any role, particularly in regulating anything.
Right.
And, to which for me, I think it's a both and. Bill Bennett, conservative Bill Bennett, I heard him say a long time ago in an interview that we just have to, what we're really trying to figure out is what is that the private sector can do well, and what is it that the government can do well. And make sure that what the private sector does well, we let them do it, and whatever the government does well, we let them do it. That's really the debate, isn't it? In a sense, finding the best place and the best hands to put these things into, and by the way, hopefully have a cooperative effort between the two as well.
Right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I'll piggyback on this. There's the moral question that vulnerable people in our society need to be taken care of. But going to a less, quote, moral question and just the pure economics of what should be done, I think what you find in Scandinavian countries and in some European countries, and there are problems with the models that are there, but I think the assumption is if people are to be productive, they have to have a certain level of stability and groundedness in order to be able to be productive. And that's the reason that you often find the robust welfare systems that you find in places like Sweden and Denmark. And if you listen and read the rationales, the issue is that they're not being altruistic. Their assumption is that people who are well cared for, who have basic needs that are taken care of, have the freedom to be more productive. And if they are more productive, that's better for the overall economy and helps grow the economy and helps the whole society flourish, rather than leaving it to the whims and inconsistencies of a private system to try to take care of people. The other issue is that if you're talking about somebody who ends up having dependents in their family and there is no safety net in order to take care of it, that means that family, the people in that family, now have to be the ones who are doing the caregiving and getting the money in order to take care of that person, which then also pulls away from their productivity to be able to work in society, and the ability to have some basic needs met without each individual having to do the bulk of the caregiving, spreading that caregiving need for resources and for help, spreading that out a little bit allows everybody to be more productive rather than just leaving it to the whims of individuals to figure it out. So I think from an economic standpoint, you could make the case that some level of minimal care for people that are dependent is a better economic structure than one that simply leaves it to the whims of people to figure out if they're going to care for people or not. So
Yeah, and I mean, I think we should be able to agree that diabetics shouldn't have to ration insulin.
right, yeah,
Right?
things like that.
I mean, seriously, and that
Right.
there's something wrong. I mean, if diabetics have to, because and I'm diabetic, but incidence of diabetes, and when diabetes is not in control, you are not productive.
Right.
You feel terrible.
Right.
And there's just something wrong when people have to ration life-saving medicine. And
Right.
so we need to fix that, and we can
Right.
debate how to fix that, but we need to fix it. So, I'm always, the other thing when we speak of these kinds of issues, Michael, that's always interested me too, is that there are, and we did talk about, I think we did talk about healthcare one time in one of our episodes, but there are different models in Europe, right?
Yeah, right.
Not all single payer. It's not all like the UK.
Almost none of them are. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I personally would prefer that whatever we do is not to have single payer. But I will tell you that I have friends in England and Canada that love their healthcare.
Right.
And even though they'll tell you, yeah, there are problems. But what bothers me is, and I don't care what system you're talking about, what we do is we make the perfect the enemy of the good. So we find places where, let's just take the UK, for example, where the single payer system, where things aren't working, certain places it's not working the way it should,
right,
or the way we would like it, and someone points that out as an indictment of the entire system. Or even in the United States, I still remember when Hillary Clinton was running for president, the famous example she used of someone dying in an emergency room or something. And you always take that one event, you take the anecdotal event, and you hold that up as to say the whole thing's a failure.
Right.
And you're just not going to continue to have productive conversation if that is what I personally would like to have the conversation, put all the options on the table and see, because I do think our healthcare system does need some work. I just know too many people who are rationing their medicine, who are what was I going to say something that went out the window on me. Forgot to take my memory medication. Who are people who don't go to the doctor even though they've got symptoms that they should attend to. And I'm just I know what it is that you got people who are in long-term cancer treatments going bankrupt or spending their life savings. And I just look at that and I say, Michael, I don't know what the answer is, but I know that's not right.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I sort of think in terms of the general 50,000 foot view, my view is that there should be universal health care, that everybody should have some basic level of care, and that there should be a substantial market component into the healthcare that occurs, because I think it's the market that often disciplines costs in the system. And what we have in many ways, in my estimation, in the United States, is kind of the worst of multiple worlds, which is we do not have universal healthcare. Although I should say the number of uninsured is now at a record low, and particularly in the past 2 or 3 years, it's the enrollment in Affordable Care Act, healthcare, that type of thing has really increased in recent years. So I think it was it 15% of the population or something like that did not have healthcare 10 years ago, and it's down to like 8%, I think, that don't have it. So I mean, we're moving in a good direction, but still universal healthcare. But I also think it needs to have a market component. And what we have now in our healthcare system is a weird hodgepodge of chaos in which nobody can figure out, doctors, health providers, patients, nobody knows what anything actually costs because of the way the prices are negotiated on various treatments and procedures, that type of thing. So there's no way you can make an informed decision about how you're going to work that. So a greater increase in market as well as universal coverage. And I think that we have, like you said, we mentioned this before, there are countries that mandate universal coverage, but then have health insuring companies provide health insurance and compete with each other in terms of the type of health insurance they're going to provide. And so people that are looking for health insurance, the citizens have to have health insurance, and they will subsidize the people at the very bottom of the income ladder who don't have money. And then the subsidy decreases as you go up with the people paying in at the top. And that way you get some market competition. That's just one model, but it's.
Yeah, no, I like I said, you and I both, we like free markets, and that
Right.
we make a case for that they do have brought us in the modern world prosperity, and
Right.
have helped a lot of people. In those systems, though, the government does provide some guardrails, don't they? I mean,
Right.
they do.
Yeah. You got to set parameters. And that's true in all sorts of industries, though. Markets are never perfect I shouldn't say markets are never perfect. Any given commodity or any given product, there are intricacies into the nature of the product, into the nature of the way people make decisions that require guardrails on a lot of different things. And that's just part of the way that the world functions. And so, there would be guardrails around that. But something, my preference is not for a wide open healthcare system where everybody's on their own and to get their health insurance, and it's not for the single payer. I'm not a fan of either of those. And I think there are many workable alternatives that are probably somewhere in the middle. But as we've talked before, whether it's immigration or whatever issue it is, the issue is what's useful to the politicians, not the solution.
Yes.
And so it gives you a way, like just as we talked about Social Security, Medicare, all the scary stuff that we talked about at the beginning, no, these are not going away. There's not a big crisis, but it's good political theater for being able to try to recruit votes.
Yeah. The solutions, politicians' job is not the solution. It's to keep us afraid.
Yeah.
And nervous about things. So,
keep them
in reference to the healthcare thing, would you be in favor? How do you feel about? Because right now, a whole lot of insurance is tied to employers.
Right.
What do you think about that? Is there a place for that in the future? Should we just dump that and do something different? What's your thoughts?
I have never liked the fact that it's tied to employment. I think that was an accident of history that it ended up becoming that way, and finding some way to unwind that would be, I think has to be a goal as well. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, what else do we want to say on this? So anybody who is concerned about the future of Social Security, rest assured, don't panic. It'll be there. Some changes here and there, but it will be there. So I guess that's a good word for the day.
Right. Yeah.
I also got to tell you, by the way, Michael, anybody I've ever known who's retired, who's on Medicare, likes it. I mean, again, they'll tell you there are problems. They'll tell you what the problems are.
Yeah.
But nobody on Medicare says, I always say that sometimes the naysayers are the people that don't benefit from some of this stuff.
Well, sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like the Affordable Care Act. Now, the Affordable Care Act's got its problems, and it really, one of the things that never happened because of the polarization in Congress, unfortunately, is, Congress could continue to be making it better, but they can't do that because for some to be willing to make it better is to say the other side won, right? Or the other side. So we can't do that.
I will say on the Affordable Care Act thing, though, that one of the things that is happening, in particular the past 3 years, there's been this sudden upsurge in number of people that are enrolling through the Affordable Care Act. People are basically voting with their dollars, with their decisions for what they want. And that eventually has impact on what Congress has to do.
Yeah. And my point, my longer point, when I did my Edith Bunker and went off subject, my larger point is that even though the Affordable Care Act could be improved, it really ultimately has stood the test and it has helped people. I have a sibling who would not have insurance if it wasn't for the Affordable Care Act. Just would not, and who has health issues.
Right.
So If you think that it's the Affordable Care Act is a disaster and needs to be replaced, I'm listening to the alternative, which I have yet to hear.
Exactly. Right.
So, yeah. Well, hopefully. Anyway, well, this has been a good conversation, Michael, and appreciate your insights on this. And if you ever do run for office, I'll be your campaign manager. I can come up with real catchy slogans.
You'll join me in a suicide pact, is what
Michael. Yeah. Yeah. Michael Cruz. He's never met a crisis he's believed in.
That's right. There you go. That's right.
All right. Good enough. All right. Well, thanks, Michael. And thanks for joining us, everybody. This is Faith Seeking Understanding, and I am Allan Bevere. And a reminder to you that the patron saint of Faith Seeking Understanding University is Anselm of Canterbury, who said, I do not understand in order to believe, but I believe in order to understand. So friends, keep seeking.